a lot of kids, especially privileged kids that we work with, right? They've grown up thinking if I don't get into Harvard or Stanford, IIT, my life is over.
We work with 100 plus organizations, and one day a CEO walks in when you were doing certain things and he says, hey, if my people are not stressed, they are not working.
If you're running an organization where by definition people work 16-hour days, if you're trying to pretend that you're a work-life balance organization or that you're an organization where everybody gets to play a sport every day, I think that's not fair. And I think many organizations struggle with that, with authenticity. That, everyone who comes here goes through this phase. And you have two choices. You can pick yourself up and aim to be the best you can be, or you can keep dragging it along. You can go have a chai and waste your time at college, and that will have its own consequences. You decide, but it's for you to decide. Mali, come here, doggy.
Mali, क्या करना है?
It's great to be on the podcast about building caring companies by Yondo.
Hello everyone, welcome to Building Caring Companies podcast. Today I have a very special guest, Suraj Moraje. Grew up in Tanzania, studied at SVNIT in Surat. At that time it was REC in Surat. Went to IIM Ahmedabad, was senior partner at McKinsey, worked in India, worked in the Philippines, was actually set up the office in Philippines, was the first Indian partner in European continent, set up practices in Africa. From there, he went on to be the CEO of Quess Corp, a publicly listed company with over 5 lakh employees, 500,000 employees, and is now running the Eka Fellowship. I had the privilege of having conversation with him. It has been so enriching. I've learned so much from him. I'm so looking forward to this conversation. Welcome, Suraj.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Super excited. Looking forward to this discussion.
Same here.
So, Suraj, tell us more. You grew up in Tanzania up till 12 years. Then you moved to Bangalore. Then SVNIT Surat happened. How was childhood for you?
Childhood was awesome. Actually born in Tanzania and grew up in Zambia, so moved a little bit, a lot of moving every 3 to 5 years, either country or city. And I suppose the change of country, the change coming back to India, I was in hostels in Bethany and Cottons here in Bangalore. I suppose it helped me be more versatile as a human being and find ways to just be happy.
I have learned your dad is a physics teacher.
Yes, that's right.
And then you ended up going to NIT Surat, which we call it now. I think at that time it's
REC in those days.
Yes, Regional Engineering College. SVNIT is also a college we work with at those. Then I remember going to the campus. They say the buildings are from 1960s, and there's a lot of pride in that.
Right? So the buildings now, many of them are new. So our hostels were broken down when I went. So we went for our 25th reunion a few years ago. Lots of new buildings. I think the admin block is the original. Yeah, that's still there.
So I want to understand, right? How was it at that time coming to all the way to NIT Surat? How did it feel like? And I remember there was also plague at that time.
Yeah, so I was in my first year we had the plague. It was a difficult time because I think that my dad had made it very clear that he was disappointed. Right? He's like, you should have been in IIT. The fact is, I didn't believe him. So I didn't work hard enough, and that's probably why I wasn't in IIT. I never thought I could be. But, he made it clear he was disappointed. Going all the way to Surat, I'd read about Surat in our history textbooks and the fort, the first British factory. Like the British landed in Surat when they came to India, and that's where they sort of started their conquest from. So I just pictured this city, this fort, and a beautiful town by the beach, because the British had landed there. There must be a beach and it must be just amazing. And you get there, and I kind of ended up in this It was really a dirty city in those days. There's a reason why the plague came there. And I only spoke English. And I had one Gujarati roommate and one Marathi roommate, neither of whom could speak any English. And so it is learning through a fire hose. At the same time, a lot of people who end up in the NITs, even today, so when I go back, they're like, oh, we didn't make it to IIT. So it's a bunch of people who feel like they won the third prize, right? And so the overall morale is also not very high. It was a difficult time. It was a difficult time, yeah, for sure.
It continues to be so, right? When you said didn't make it to IITs, even right now so we work with a lot of IITs and a lot of NITs.
Yeah.
And when we go to IIT, first year in NIT is very tough. Everybody, it's not like in IITs, the comparison is amongst each other.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, I'm not good enough. That person is better than me. In the NITs, their comparison is with their friends in the coaching institutes. He got into IIT. And
no, you're spot on. And I think that, we're talking about wellness today. And as you know, I work a lot with adolescents at both the Eka Fellowship and at Inner Campus Village. And I still think that one of the, a lot of kids, especially privileged kids that we work with, right? They've grown up thinking if I don't get into Harvard or Stanford or IIT, my life is over. And I think that's just not true. But I think it's so ingrained by us, by the system. Frankly, if you look at the probabilities of getting in, it's a crapshoot, right? It's going to be on a bad day, you won't get in. On a good day, you will get in. And yet we define our brands by the institutes we go to. So, it is tough.
And you've been an avid reader. I remember we were having that discussion and you said your maths, I think failed in the maths subject.
I did fail in maths.
How was that for you?
Terrible. So I think I'd hit that point in the first semester where I was just unhappy, and I think the plague hit soon after that. And I remember coming back and talking to a senior in the fourth year, and he looked at me and said, everyone who comes here goes through this phase, and you have two choices. You can pick yourself up and aim to be the best you can be, or you can, you can keep dragging it along. You can go have a chai. It was called Ichchanath. Right in the front, there's a temple. You can go to Ichchanath and have a chai every evening and waste your time at college, and that will have its own consequences. You decide, but it's for you to decide. And that is a bit of a wake-up call. So after that, I didn't fail in maths anymore. And thankfully, I did quite well after that. Yeah, I started applying myself. But it's also, I think, once I realized in my life, once I take ownership over outcomes, it's very liberating, because you're no longer feeling like a victim. And if you fail, it's your failure. It's not the system's failure.
You're not in that self-pity anymore.
Yeah, you take accountability. You take accountability. It's on you.
And then you went on to be at McKinsey, right?
So first IIMA and then McKinsey. Yeah, that was very lucky. I spent 20 years there, traveling around a little bit. So started off in India, spent my first 4 years here, and then 4 years in Belgium, 6 years in South Africa, and then 4 years in the Philippines before coming back.
I believe you were the first partner in Europe from India, right?
I was at the time. You think about it, it was 2007. It's not that long ago, for those of us who lived longer. But yeah, it was strange, but I think maybe it was never tried. There have been many, many since. But yeah, it was, in those days, I was the first. And I was interestingly, partly because I spent my childhood abroad, I never thought of myself, I've never felt like an outsider wherever I've been. Or maybe I thought of myself as an outsider everywhere I've been. Either ways, it didn't feel different. And so to me, it didn't feel that different at all.
So from being at McKinsey, where you have such high talent density, you then moved out of McKinsey and joined Quess Corp.
Yeah.
Which works with like 5 lakh people, if I'm not wrong.
Today, I think about 6.
6? Oh, wow. Right. And then we have so many blue collar. How are the cultures different at?
It's, I think very different. I mean, first of all, you're going from one of the highest margin services businesses in the world to one of the lowest margin services businesses in the world, right? Quess general staffing business has a 1% PAT margin. And so there's very little room for error. highly operational, also very different kinds of talent. I wouldn't say high talent density and low talent density. I would say, you take a bunch of McKinsey people into Quess, I don't think they'd be able to run Quess. You take a bunch of Quess people into McKinsey, they won't be able to do what McKinsey does. So a very different caliber of people, highly operational, highly sort of very good at sort of doing something repeatably time and time again. Right? That takes discipline and that takes a certain level of diligence and the ability to not get bored. Right? So I think it's just very different, and it was fun. It was fun to see a very different kind of company after 20 years at one company. Quest did very well. We did very well. And I enjoyed being operational. I think I learned about myself that I actually enjoy going sort of elbow deep in the operations. And that's a new facet that I discovered that I didn't expect to discover, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, but I also want to understand, right? We keep reading in the media about some of the unfortunate incidents that happened at some of the companies here, be it at McKinsey, be it at EY, etc. What do you think would be some of those triggers?
So it is very, very sad. It is very sad when anybody takes their own lives. And there's probably a whole bunch of people across the corporate world who've not taken their own lives but are not happy. Was it Thoreau who said that the majority of men, obviously he didn't think about women back in those days, but the majority of men in their 40s are living lives of quiet desperation. And I think it's not untrue. Look, I think a large part of mental wellness in that sense, I think it's about two things. One is purpose and the second is expectations. A McKinsey consulting firm, a banker, an investment banker, banking firm, they're hard charging places and they don't pretend to be anything else, right? There are places with a very high talent density and therefore probably a very high bar on quality internally. And so they can get very stressful as jobs. And by the way, you're dealing with clients all the time and your clients are very high caliber too, because you're dealing with the top management at your clients. And so you're always on the ball. I think they're very stressful jobs. And I think that one should only join those kinds of organizations if one is actually in it for the stress, in a sense. I think there's a kind of person who enjoys that kind of work and a kind of person who doesn't like it at all, which is why a lot of these firms have such high attrition, because people will join and 6 months later say, this is not what I want to do. And rightfully so. It's not wrong to not want something else, right? And they'll move on. I think where we as corporates need to be a lot clearer is being transparent about what we stand for. I always say it's important for leaders. Like if you're running an organization where by definition people work 16-hour days, you've got to make that clear. If you're trying to pretend that you're a work-life balance organization or that you're an organization where everybody gets to play a sport every day, I think that's not fair, right? And I think many organizations struggle with that, with authenticity in speaking about what's good about them and speaking about what's not so good about their culture. And I think it's very important we as leaders be comfortable doing that.
It's like army never says it's going to be easy, right?
Right? The army says you will have a wide range of experiences, you'll get to defend your country, and you'll be respected in society, right? And by the way, there's also cons to being in the army, which is you may never be very rich. People join some of these on the other hand, the high-end services organizations, people join because they think they'll make a lot of money, but that comes with a cost. And the cost is one of stress, and the cost is one of time. And by the way, I think there's also other organizations in between, these organizations which claim to be very ethical, which are not. And I think if you're not a very ethical organization, don't claim to be. You will find sufficient employees who are happy to work in a not ethical company. But if you then hire somebody who's very ethical, they will not be happy there either, right? So I think it's important that we as corporates, represent ourselves correctly and be comfortable representing ourselves correctly.
Yeah, I think I like that. Authenticity is the word, right? Like thieves will never say, "Come work for me, we'll do good job."
Yeah.
Like they will say, "We are thieves, we're going to rob."
And they attract thieves, and that's
Yes.
fine, right?
Yes,
They're all
that's
happy
fine.
together. It's not fine to be a thief, but I'm saying they feel.
Like they're authentic, right? They're
Yeah.
really saying what they are, so they attract the right kind of people.
Exactly.
About. I also want to understand a little bit. I know we were talking about your journey, right? 20 years at McKinsey, working across continents, working across countries, doing so well in your career. I know 20 years is a good career, but why did you decide to? Like, what changed at that time?
So I think the trigger, strangely enough, was I felt quite ill. It was an infection in my spine, and that got me out of action for about 6 months. And that's the point. We were still in the Philippines, and I said, I just want to go home now. And we moved back to India. And then I had a relapse. And I think that's the point at which I started thinking very hard about what is my purpose and what do I want to do with my life. I think I had the privilege at that time of saying, I no longer need to be economically insecure. Sure, there's always room to make more money. I'd always love to have more things, but I don't need to anymore work for things. And I think for many of us who grew up in middle class India, having sufficient things was a very big driver for the longest time. And I think being unwell gave me time to realize, actually, I don't need to do that anymore. Like, I'm in a different place and my family is going to be fine. And to start thinking about, then what is it that I want? Like, who am I and what do I want? And that's been a progressive journey over the last 5 to 6 years, I would say. So initially I was very clear I wanted to stay in the commercial world. It's the world I understood. But I wanted to work in a business where I truly believed, coming in every day, that what we did was good for society. And Quess was looking for a CEO around that time for the turnaround. I felt the business was meaningful. I felt I could do what had to be done there. And so I joined. And my first day as CEO was, I think, 2 weeks into the first lockdown, the COVID lockdown. So I joined thinking this is a growth mandate, and the first year was a completely different mandate. And that's when we also worked with your dost, I remember then, because we had people to think about, and it was very wide. A lot of people were very stressed at that time. So did 2 years of that, realized it was time to move on, enjoyed it a lot, learned a lot from it. And the last couple of years, I've kind of given myself even more leeway to experiment, to say, what if I realize I actually can be quite entrepreneurial? And I realized that that I do enjoy building and running things. And so we've been working, so the Eka Fellowship has been running for a couple of years. That's where we work with underprivileged kids. The idea being to figure out, what does it take to help an adolescent, underprivileged kid, support them over a long period of time to help them get to the best starting place in life. So it's a very long-term program. I'm very fortunate to be able to think long-term. It's just a privilege that we have. We don't have to think year on year. In a Compass, we work with kids who can pay to help them experience the world of work. And I've also been running this pilot along with a friend from business school, which has given me a lot of happiness. We're piloting a venture around reforestation on a commercial basis, and trying to figure out how can one do that. So I don't know, maybe they all work, maybe none of them work. We're putting our best into all of them, but it's been a process of learning about myself and what I enjoy and where I can make an impact.
Yeah, I love that. You're exploring yourself. But I also want to ask you, right? You had a fantastic career. You have 20 years, so you like you said, right, financially stable. Now I can focus on that. That's when you started, probably when you weren't keeping well. You started focusing on meaning and purpose. Is that something for an individual? Is that something you should start thinking once the basics are taken care of? What are your thoughts about it?
I think I've always thought about meaning and purpose, in the sense that out of business school, I was very clear I will not apply to investment banks. Again, more power to investment bankers. But I was very clear that for me, consulting, it just felt like helping people felt more meaningful, right? when I was elected partner at McKinsey, I thought very hard about what does it mean to be a partner and what's my purpose. And the reason I moved from Belgium to Africa was I said, if I'm going to be a partner at the firm, I want to create a new part of the firm or help be part of building something new at the firm that creates more opportunities for people. So I think purpose is something one thinks about throughout. But I think what happens is, as I've grown older, I think a couple of things have happened. One, I think I've understood myself better. So I know I'm never going to own a boat because I don't want to own a boat, right? Like, if I've not wanted to own a boat in 40 years, I'm not going to suddenly start wanting to own a boat or a plane. It's just not who I am. And therefore, I don't need that much more money. But I think the aperture one gives oneself to explore purpose, because I've been fortunate enough to have a good career, fortunate enough to have a good network, people who I can reach out to for help. I think the aperture, the leeway I can give myself to follow my purpose has just been expanding.
Suraj, I also want to ask you something. I know McKinsey, my other co-founder used to be at McKinsey, right? And you've also spoken about like a 60-hour work day. Happens, even sometimes goes to 80-hour week, etc. as well, right? And sometimes, at least I know, when I was in hedge fund, I used to work for Niche. I used to put in long hours, and because I wanted to move fast in my career, right? But with Gen Zs, there is also a lot of conversation that there are people who want to prioritize work-life balance. And what are your thoughts, or what are your take on it?
I think the world needs all types. It's interesting. You go to Paris and you perceive that all French people stop working at 4 o'clock and sit in a street side cafe drinking coffee or beer or sipping wine. But actually, there are people in Paris who are working till 9 o'clock every night. There are bankers and consultants, and not to stereotype bankers and consultants, but there are, the people in the corporate world. There are people running night shops who work all night. So, I think that it takes all kinds to keep society moving forward. And therefore, I think people should do what they think is purposeful for them. One of the things I do feel, though, is I think that one needs to be cognizant of where your efforts are taking you. So I get to speak to a lot of young people. I'll typically, anybody reaches out, I'll make time to talk to them. I just enjoy talking to young people. And one of the things I sometimes worry about is they'll go and say, oh, I've watched this masterclass podcast, or I've heard this person on YouTube. I know how to do this. I don't have to work hard. I'm going to be worth $1 billion in 5 years. And I think the real world is not like that. Yes, it can happen. You can win the lottery, but winning the lottery is not a strategy for life, right? You've been at those for 10 years now. It's taken 10 years to build this. And so I think one needs to be cognizant that you can have work-life balance. I think you can have work-life balance and have a very good life. But then don't compare yourself, or don't say I'm going to have work-life balance and I am going to own a house on Lavelle Road. Be happy, understand that it's a package, and buy into the package. It's difficult to pick and choose. I don't think life works that way always.
Very, very well said, right? You need to know what it will mean for you also, right? Yeah, I think something to reflect on. What is wellness for you? How do you define wellness for yourself?
So I spoke to my wife about it today, and she gave me a framework. And it's interesting because I had missed one part. So I think there is physical wellness. Then there's mental wellness. But the part she added on was social wellness. And it really resonated with me. But I think for me, table stakes is actually first physical wellness. So I was at a corporate event recently, and we spoke to the group about what they want to change in their lives. And they wrote down for themselves. And as I would walk around, I was kind of glimpsing at what they were writing. And I was shocked how many people were writing about work hours, or about diet, or about exercise. Right? And I think one of the industries that's done our current consumer society a lot of disservice is our consumer health industry, our consumer food industry, our nutrition industry. Because we seem to have told people you can eat all the protein you want, or at least people have got the impression they can eat all the protein they want. As long as they take lots of supplements, they can eat exactly, do exactly what they want. You know, eat as many protein bars as you want. It's got no sugar, it only has dates in it. You know, and that's not true. I mean, dates are sugar. At the end of the day, it's natural sugar, but it's sugar. And I feel somehow we've gotten into this place where, you know, home delivery of food, you have a midnight spike in many cities. So the fourth or fifth meal seems to have become a norm in India, right? And I feel like when it comes to physical health, and then, you know, as long as I go and take a long walk every day, I'm fine. Right? But I think number one, I think everybody needs to sleep 8 hours. I went from a life where I was taking 2 red-eye flights a week to a life where I actually more or less sleep 8 hours every night, and I can feel different. I'm a different person. I lose weight. I've lost weight. I'm mentally in a happier place. I'm a more friendly, pleasant person. I think you got to sleep 8 hours a day. I think you have to eat less. I think most Indians who earn well have to eat less than they're eating today. I think eating in moderation. There's this. My favorite nutrition book is a book by Michael Pollan called In Defense of Food, and he just makes it so simple. He says, eat food, which is stuff your grandparents would recognize. Eat less, and by the way, eat mostly vegetables, because your grandparents also, even if they were non-vegetarian, most days they ate vegetables only because meat was too difficult to get. So I think eating, and then exercise for me is a distant third. I think if you sleep well and eat okay, a little bit of exercise and you're fine. You don't have to hit the gym every day and go nuts. So one is physical. I think there's the mental wellness, and we've spoken about purpose, but also expectations, right? I think I have a purpose in life which says I really want to, I want to paint. And therefore, I'm going to find a job where I don't have to work after 5 o'clock, so I can go home and paint every day. I can take painting classes. And that's a wonderful life, I think, if you're a good painter and that's what you like. But then match your expectations with that. And keep your expectations of life low, because expectations are what creates unhappiness at some level. So I think balancing purpose and expectations at the mental level. And then something that became very real for me in my 40s, and that's why I came back to India, was actually social wellness. So for the longest time, we'd move country to country, and I don't think until we came back to Bangalore, I've never actually, this is the longest in my life I have lived in one city, 6 years, right? And coming back to a city I'd left 25 years ago. And it feels wonderful because I've got school friends passing by. Many don't live here anymore, but they will come to see their parents. I've got college friends who live here. And a lot of my life, most of my friends were from my current company. They were office friends. Or they were society friends, where you go and you just kind of, you talk about what's happening in the stock market and what's happening in cricket, and it ends there, right? We're all going to live longer. Our kids will probably cross 100. And the only thing that will make that life bearable is having friends. And not just having friends, but having friends you can visit whenever you want to. Knowing who your neighbor is. Like, we've become a society where we've all migrated for work, all of us. Many of us don't know our neighbors. We don't know who they are, we don't bother, right? But is that a society in which we want to grow old? What happens? I see so many people who turn 65, leave office, and then realize, gosh, I don't know people, I'm not invested in people. I've now got to start making friends, and I've got to start making connections. And I think it's so important for us to think about our social health as well. And Deepika will probably tell me I've completely misquoted her or misunderstood her framework, but this is my interpretation.
No, this is actually, there's a book called The Good Life. right? There's 86 years of research on happiness. Says people who live the longest, they live in communities, right? They because they have those relationships. That's what allows them to live the longest, right? And if you would read about any of these research about the blue zones, etc., that'll also tell you the same thing. So yes, of course, social wellness is extremely important.
But then how do you do it in a city? Most of our cities are by definition anonymous. We don't care who's selling us vegetables. And right now the people selling us vegetables come on bikes and drop them outside our house, right? We don't even have a sabji wala anymore. We don't go to neighborhood stores. We don't have a culture of neighborhood restaurants. I remember when I was in hostel, there was this uncle in the kirana store next door, and we'd get 5 rupees every week as pocket money, and you'd go and say, "Uncle, uncle, give me this. Uncle, uncle, give me that." And I still remember him. I don't remember his name. But those were the glue that kind of held us all together, right? Some days he'd give us 50 paise credit. Okay, next week you can pay me back. Small favors. I knew you knew if you fell on the road, he'd look out for you. I don't know how many of us today even know our security guards, know the security guards outside our building on our roads. Now, how do we get away from anonymity? I think it's so important.
And of course, we talked about society and social fabric. But also in organization, I feel like social wellness is such a big important pillar, right? If a CEO walks in and says, "Hey, if you're not stressed," and I've seen that happening. We work with 100 plus organizations, and one day a CEO walks in when we were doing certain things and he says, "Hey, if my people are not stressed, they are not working."
Right? Interesting.
So I think that's social wellness. How do you create a community? Be it an organization, be it in your society, right? There's a Diwali celebration, there is Eid celebration, all of it. And involving everybody from our mates to our nannies, everybody, so that they feel a part of the community. And then they start knowing each other and the bonds are formed. I have a dog, I was telling you, right? One day, we just walked out of your house and we were going downstairs for something. Our cook was in the house. And we left and we said we'll come back in an hour. And I think hour is maximum she stays on her own. I think our cook left the house. She walked outside behind him. I think we didn't notice that, right? And but my neighbor came out, sat there with almost 1.5 just hours just to make sure she was safe, right? So I think it's very important to have those communities.
That's exactly the fabric we need. That's exactly it. That's exactly the fabric we need, and I think we need to. I wish that we would work harder to build that fabric as local communities, as companies. I also think some of it is structural. I think there are some industries. If you're sitting in India and all your customers are in the US, for example, by definition, you don't have time in the week at all because you're kind of going to office in the morning and then you're working till midnight taking calls. And a lot of the networking you're doing if you're selling abroad is abroad. And so you're not actually focused. When you're in these all-consuming jobs, you're not actually thinking about post-retirement life. You're thinking about your next promotion or your bonus this year. And that's where your social energy, I suppose, is going. That makes it a bit tougher to build fabric.
And but you also make those choices.
They're choices. And those are the choices you have to make, ideally consciously, as opposed to having them made for you.
And realizing it later in the life, right? Yeah, very interesting. I'm curious, right? What was that one most vulnerable moment for you, Suraj?
Vulnerable? Yeah. If you think of the last couple of years since I left my last full-time corporate role, I told myself I will not do anything, take another role, full-time role, unless I'm 100% sure that this is what I want to do. Like it can't be 90%, it's got to be 100%. And that's been very tough because on the one hand, it's meant saying no, and I've said no to everything that's come my way so far. On the one hand, it's meant saying no to everything I know, but it's meant also me needing to have faith that there's something about myself I've not quite discovered. And I do think that if you look at the trajectory of my life, right, it was always, I did science because that's what bright kids did in those days. Wrote the engineering entrance because I didn't want to do biology. Therefore, obviously it's engineering. After engineering, did the MBA because, again, it just gives you a higher starting salary. Joining McKinsey, in a sense, yes, I didn't do banking, but, if you went to business school, you had to aspire for one of the two. If you had the grades, you joined. You never said no to it. And then that sort of has its own stream, right? Once you join a company, you settle in a particular practice, and that kind of has its own flow and takes you somewhere. And so you're always sort of building on the momentum in your life, but never consciously choosing whether you want to jump into a different stream. And you're always worried. For me, for the longest time, I was really worried, what will people say? Like, I'm not working. Are they going to stop? Like, are offers going to stop coming my way? Are people going to think I've lost it? Thankfully, it hasn't happened yet. But there's all these insecurities. What if there is nothing better out there? Like, what if this is it? That's been a very tough time, actually.
What was that one moment, one conversation that was like?
I can't think of one moment, but I can think of every time I said no to something. I'd come home and Deepika would be like, yeah, that makes sense. I'd be like, no, it doesn't make any sense. And then we'd fight over it. I'd be like, this is all your fault, and giving me stupid ideas. And the thing is, you don't know. Maybe some of them may have been great, right? You never know what the alternate reality could have been. But I'm getting to learn more about myself, understand the things I enjoy doing. I spend time on things I really enjoy. I think I'm having a lot of impact, a high quality of impact. I think I've learned that scale is not everything in life. I aspire less for scale actually now. I think I want to be more like that Kirana wala uncle who touched lives deeply. But who knows? Who knows what life has in store?
It touched on a very important point, right? Where you talked about scale. I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs that you see, anybody building a business. I think there's this thing here, we haven't reached 100 million mark in 5 years, 10 years, right? What are we doing? What are we doing about our life? Scale versus quality. How do you even judge, right? Because you'll find somebody else on the other side doing more, right? And you're like, no, I haven't done enough. They are better. Do I not have it? Like in moments like that, what do you do?
So difficult. It really is so difficult, no? Because on the one hand, who says there's a trade-off? Right? You talk to many people, they'll say you should do scale and quality both. Why can't you do both? On the other hand, I think M.F. Hussain could only have painted so many paintings in his life. Did he aspire for scale? Maybe. Painted many horses. But at the end, I mean, in the global scheme of things, not, right? You can't scale a job shop. And there's a certain quality to what a job shop does. There's a certain satisfaction I'm sure a painter gets from doing every painting that he or she would not get by pressing Control P and making 100 of them. I think at the end, one has to ask oneself what one is driven by. I think if you're building a business because you want to maximize your financial outcomes, then scale is the right answer. Right? And what is wrong with great financial outcomes? There's nothing wrong with having great financial outcomes. I think if you're building a business which is about doing stuff you really, really enjoy, building a product you love to build, then there could be trade-offs. Especially if it's a services business. I think you need to simplify it and make it more replicable and make it more playbookable, if you will. So I think there are trade-offs in some places, and I think each person has to find their own. I think, again, the trap that a lot of us fell into until 2 years ago was if it's not worth $100 million, it's not worth anything. Think of your favorite restaurant growing up where you'd go with friends. I think of Crystal in Bombay. I don't know if you're familiar. It's on Marine Drive. If anybody asks me what's my one favorite restaurant in the whole world, it's Crystal. And the amount of happiness Crystal gave me as a bachelor, because I got hot fulkas, a homely dal, and it just made me happy listening to like Ramaya Vastavaya, like the same song every time. Thank God he didn't try to scale. It was so special, and I'm sure he made a lot of money. He was probably very comfortable through his life because he made money. He wasn't doing charity. So I think there's a place for high quality boutique operations that will keep you comfortable, but that you'll have to run for the rest of your life. You're not going to be able to sell out for a gazillion bucks and then go sit in the Bahamas. But I would argue that selling for a gazillion bucks, that's possible. Sitting in the Bahamas, most people don't do. Because you've got to keep busy, you've got to have purpose, you've got to keep doing things. You can only be an angel for so long, right? Then you've got to go do something again. And so if you've got, maybe there are some people who just love building things and selling things and building things and selling things, and more power to them. But there are some people who just might want to build something and run it for the rest of their lives.
I think going back to what you said, right? Knowing what you want is maybe more important, right? What works for you. But I think with so much social media and so much news that you hear, you always get bogged down.
I think a lot of people feel judged. The word lifestyle business has become such a derogatory term. Ye to lifestyle kar raha hai. What's wrong with lifestyle businesses? Yeah, you want to make money so you can have a lifestyle, right? So the business is already giving you a lifestyle. It's like the story of the guy who goes to the fisherman and says, why are you fishing? And the guy says, well, I enjoy it. He says, you should buy a net and buy a boat, because then you can go and catch more fish. He says, then what will I do? Well, you'll make more money. Then what will I do? Then you can start a company. Then what will I do? Then you can sell the company. Then what will you do? Well, you can go fishing every day. But I'm going fishing every day and I'm happy, right? So I think it is important to get a grip. Some of it we do for social pressure. If I'm not raising venture capital funding, what I'm doing is irrelevant.
So at Yodos, we raised our last round of funding 8 years back.
That must be causing stress because people want exits?
No, our investors are very comfortable. So we turned profitable 5 years back, and we hadn't raised a lot of money that it sort of bothers them. So, and they're very happy that there are less companies in their portfolio which are profitable. So they're like, we'll not bother you, right? And we have actually generated more profits than we had raised money. And when we hire people, that's their question. When are you raising money? While we might still, but that's not really something that we are really going after. We are going after adding more clients, adding more business, etc. We are profitable. We don't really need to raise money and dilute ourselves, because then you have to run on various other terms as well, right? And then people would say this, right? Why do you want to run it like a lifestyle business? Is there anything wrong in running it profitably, growing? They're like, no, but it's, you need to keep raising a lot of money if you really want to look good and attract a good talent. And I was like, okay, when does the definition of business change, right? I thought business was about sustainability and profitability, etc.
The fallacy, the sad thing is that a few years ago, and I think still today, it is difficult to hire people if you don't tell them we're going to raise money and your stock is going to be worth a lot. The reality is, I think there's a handful of people, literally a handful, who have retired off secondary sales of the ESOPs. Most people have joined these companies thinking they're going to be unicorns, but the unicorns are mythical creatures. They're going to be unicorns, soonicorns, loonicorns, what have you. But they've just not been able to monetize because everybody else monetizes first, right? And so you join this company saying, they're going to do something and they're growing really fast. And so it's going to be worth a lot. And then you don't actually make the money that you think you're going to make. And then you've had neither lifestyle nor wealth, and I think it's sad. I can see it's balancing back again today. But one of the things I do when I hire is to say, look, set expectations. I don't want to hire people who want to build unicorns, because I'm not going to do that. I want to hire people who want a comfortable life, who trust that we will do the right things for them, who have a long-term view and love what we do, and will build a very, very high quality service for whoever it is we serve, be it in the not-for-profit side or the for-profit side. Because at the end, that's what I'm driven by. I would hate to be on top of a large company which makes a lot of money but delivers substandard services. That would personally not make me feel good.
Where everybody's talking valuation and unicorn and this and that. Can you really be true to who you are?
Yeah, and if you had $100 million, what would you actually do with it?
Going back to Bahamas.
So when my elder son was, he was probably 12 years old, and this kid from the time he was born has always wanted to be very, very rich, $1 billion. And the difficulty with this generation is all their role models are billionaires, right? There's no like millionaire, they're all billionaires. So if it's not a billion, it's not, it's nothing. I remember he went to meeting with one of my mentors who was in Dubai and had done very well for himself professionally. And my son said, I want to be a billionaire. And he said, why? And they started having this discussion about how much money is enough. And by the end of the conversation, I think they landed at, okay, more than $20 million stops making a difference, really, in a sense. And I thought it was a very stupid conversation. Not stupid, but it is not stupid, that's wrong. It is a cute conversation between a child who kind of doesn't really know what he's saying and a mentor who's indulging him. But I think if most of us run the numbers, we don't need that much. And beyond a point, our lifestyles don't change. And so the question really is, what is the balance you need, right, in terms of how much you shoot for?
You've lived across various countries, various cultures that you've seen. How do they prioritize their own wellness? Second, how have you seen organizations in various geography prioritizing wellness of their people?
That's a great question, and I think attitudes towards wellness are so cultural. I think culture is determined by country, the country you live in. I think it's determined by the industry that you work in. You work in BPO, you're expected to stay up all night, for example, right? Because that's just how it is. The industry you work in, and it's determined by the city you live in. I remember when I started working in Bombay, it was completely accepted that you would commute an hour to an hour and a half to work every day, each way. It was accepted already in 1999. And you'd have women in the locals cutting vegetables on the way back because they just planned it that way, and they all had their seats. And it was programmed into their lives. And at that point, we're like, oh my God, Mumbai is such a mechanical, robotic place to work because you've got to commute like this. Now, all of India is this way. Any big cities are that, right? But the city makes a big difference. I think so when I lived in Johannesburg, nothing is more than 20, 25 minutes away. Nothing. And so that means you get those many more hours a day back. So I think the city determines a lot. I think the industry determines a lot. Like we said, BPO. I think if you're a banker, you're working 18-hour days because that's just the culture of the place. But what is intriguing is the geography, the country. So at McKinsey, I worked across multiple countries. The Netherlands, for example, is a country where even at McKinsey, people are able to get the same amount of work done in far fewer hours. Partly because it's acceptable there to say, I'm going home. It's just culturally acceptable to say, I have hockey at 6 o'clock today, so I've got to leave, right? So I think that's a part of it. I think another part of it is some cultures, like I think Indians as a culture we're highly inefficient because we love to chat, and then we'll stop and we'll snack, and then we have to have chai after that. And all these things are built into our work culture, right? And if you're not going along with that, you're rude. If you don't stop for chai with the team, you're just rude. Like you're not a nice person. And it's not good or bad, it's just very, very different. And so I think it's very difficult working in a large Indian city in a competitive industry to actually have less than a 12-hour working day every day. And you'll probably work weekends as well because you want to show your boss that you're committed. It's highly competitive in India as well, right? Whereas the same company in South Africa, you would be going to the gym in the morning, You'd be going home by 4, 5. You'd cook yourself a nice meal, probably meet friends every day because you had the time. So it does change dramatically. And I think I would put Asia and the US as the two hardest charging work cultures, right? And I think maybe because we've done so much work with the US through IT services and we're so influenced as a corporate culture by the US, we're taking a bit after them, which is a very hard charging and very limited vacation culture. Europe people would take 4 weeks off every month, every year. Sorry, it's my summer, I'm taking it, and everybody takes it, and you're not judged for it. Can you imagine going to your boss in India and saying I'm taking 4 weeks off? Like they'll be like, don't come back, right? So it is very cultural and contextual for sure.
You picked up on something very interesting, right? We're going after because of from movies to a lot of servicing business that we have done with the US. But US is also very efficient, right? 9 hours work done mostly. Whereas you have China on the other side, growing very fast, but they take pride in 6 hours work day, 12 hours a day, right? Yeah. How do you think we will be going? Like our path will be charted after?
So I think in general, it's good that I think more or less most organizations have embraced a 5-day work week. I hope we get to a place, I think we need to get to a place where we understand that so we now understand that people can work from anywhere. But I think that's not been a positive thing because people end up working all the time everywhere. I do think I think part of why we see engagement going down, especially in youngsters, is because there's a whole generation of youngsters who've seen their parents also work their butts off. And they're like, this has not gone anywhere. This is not a life I want to lead. And I think, I also see it. So I go to rural Karnataka quite often for our reforestation work. And I see a lot of youngsters there who are very clear they don't want to come to the city because they're going to end up living in small homes on the outskirts. Maybe they'll ride a Swiggy bike, they'll do work at Swiggy, or they'll work in a warehouse where they have to work 12-hour days. They're going to make what? 20, 30,000 a month. On the other hand, if they stay where they are, they mostly have small pieces of land which give them some food, but they get free food grain from the government. 800 million Indians get free food grain. In Karnataka, women get 2,000 rupees a month paid into their bank accounts. If I have a wife, she's getting that money. Free healthcare, my kids get free education. I get 100 days of Manrega work if I need it. And then I can make a little bit of work money on the side, with kind of casual labor here and there. My wife will make some casual labor here and there. And I think there's a real trade-off in their minds to saying, do I want to do that? Do I want to do this? Like, why is that attractive? And the delivery jobs probably pay more than, if I go as an entry-level salesperson, I'm making 15, 20,000 a month. Like, do I really want to do that? So I think there are people saying I'm willing to make these trade-offs. It's okay, I'm okay where I am. I get to breathe fresh air. All of my friends are around me. We joke a lot, we have fun. Sure, I don't have a career. And sure, I'm never going to be rich. But I'm also never going to be starving because there's enough of a social blanket now. And so I think we need to think harder as a corporate world about how we create environments which are attractive for people to come and work in. Otherwise, people will find alternatives.
Yeah, research says I think urbanization has slowed down, right, over the years.
Yeah, I think engagement is at an all-time low. Frankly, I feel a part of it is also because organizations change so frequently at the top. Most CEOs have a 2 to 3 year window because that's also what they think the stock market wants. Whether it actually does or not, we can argue. I have a different view there. I think the stock market is not that worried. But CEOs have a 2 to 3 year perspective. And so you're kind of pushing that down the organization, creating all these ripples. Now we go left, now we go right, now we go center, now we go left, now we go right. Um, I think it creates a lot of cynicism down the organization. And then you've got young kids who are coming into these organizations who are maybe not. There's a larger section of society in India, around the world today, coming from not poor backgrounds, who maybe can still live with their parents. They can make that trade-off and say, fine, I'll live with my parents, I'll earn less, but you know what, I'm not putting up with crap in my life. And they will make that call. Why wouldn't they?
Yeah, and I probably want to dig a little bit on that, right? I think the fundamental question also I want to ask you is, should corporates, right, which are running well, generating profit, should they even prioritize employee and employee wellness, so to say, right? As long as the numbers are making sense, should that even be prioritized?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that very, very selfishly, as an organization, if I want to get the best out of my employee, I want them to be in the best mental and physical shape possible. I want them to be able to put in the hours, not get tired. There are studies linking lack of sleep to drunkenness. I don't know those statistics, but I think a person who is tired, unfit, hasn't slept enough, not even talking about mental health issues, is just not productive and is not delivering as much value to you as they could. So yes, I think you should care. But at the same time, I think you need to be very careful not to do tokenism. I mean, I know you provide helpline services also, but I think saying we care about our people, here's a helpline, is not really caring about wellness. Right? I think you got to start by purpose, clarifying your purpose, helping people align to the purpose, making people excited. Most people will work harder without feeling tired if they're motivated by the organization's purpose. Purpose is a very, very powerful thing that I think is under leveraged in the corporate world, because it's easier to leverage bonuses. But purpose. And then I think we can start doing things very differently. I think the kinds of snacks we have in our offices. When we go to offsites, what kind of food do we provide in the offsites? What time do we have dinner at our offsites? Like, do we pack the day and then make sure everybody, so people can only eat at 9 o'clock at night? Like, it's so important. Like, if we give food, if people are working late, do we force them to eat something in the office at 7, saying, no, if you're here at 7, you'll eat something and this is dinner. Like, it's a healthy meal at 7, because 7 is the latest you should be eating biologically. Are we making those kinds of changes and driving those messages? Or are we driving this culture of work late, order a pizza at midnight? Nothing wrong with the pizza at the right time and the right amount, but are we driving that as a culture and as a norm?
So when we started Yodos, right, we have a lot of young people in the workforce. I think they would firstly they would skip a lot of times the lunch, or they'll be like, just go down, eat something, just scrap and come back. So I think one of the things we started very early on, this is our 10th year running, this food comes to office, right? The virtue that it's right there, people will go and eat like a chapati or a dal and a rice, and that 1 hour, 1 to 2, the guy will come and everybody gets free food, and that sort of changes the way people, I think there's also a lot of connection to work, and there's also a lot of connection to each other.
Because you're eating
together, right?
Yeah.
People who work, so we also, because we work 24/7, we have night shifts as well, right? We ensure there is sort of dinner for them as well, right? I think one of the very selfishly, that's also one of the reasons for our attention. They're like, बाकी जगह खाना भी नहीं मिलता अच्छा.
No, it makes a difference to people, and we underestimate how difficult it is if you're a young person in the city to just get high quality food. I sometimes try on some of these delivery apps to get like home style food. Right? Back in the day, you could get it. Today, it's more difficult because everybody's made chains out of these home style thingies, American style. Yeah. And none of them have anything that's home or style. It's just fat and a bunch of like spices in them that kind of make them smell good and make you want to eat more of them, right? And I think our restaurant culture, we don't have a culture of vegetables in our restaurant food. It's either like, if you're non-vegetarian, a lot of meat with lots of carbs. If you're vegetarian, it's paneer with lots of carbs. And neither is good in large quantities.
Yeah, I completely get that. I think that's a It's a big difference, right? And like you said, I think I like that word of wellness is not tokenism. Right? It's not a tick in the checkbox. हम ये भी कर रहे हैं, हम ये भी कर रहे हैं, हम ये भी कर रहे हैं. It's about really caring for your people, right? I've also heard you saying in our previous conversations about creating that village where managers are trained. They're supporting their, peers and the people who are reporting to them. They're able to give right feedback. All of that contributes to their.
And I think preventive is so important. So I have a friend who runs a company called Gayatri. So she focuses on maternal on women's health. And I was talking to her, and she says PCOS is such a big issue today amongst women, and it's an issue which can be avoided, can be managed, but nobody is doing anything about it, and that is a serious wellness issue. So I just think that there are a lot of things that we, I think we do a lot of health checkups for diabetes, but do we help our employees avoid diabetes? How do we get to a place where we help our employees prevent this stuff? And I think obesity amongst young people, when I sort of walk in these corporate complexes, it just seems to be, people seem to be overweight a lot. And I think it's because we're not getting the right food.
Not prioritizing also the right food, right? Sometimes you're just working and you skip meal, you skip sometimes dinner, etc. Yeah, you're very right.
But it's also, I've noticed now, because maybe I'm as I grow older, I'm more sensitive to it. But when I travel, if I want to eat even if I want to eat a balanced meal, I can't, right? So I'm vegetarian. If I go to an Italian restaurant, it is pasta. If I go to an Indian restaurant, it's roti and some very, very sort of fatty dish. The only place where I can actually get vegetables is a Chinese restaurant. That seems to be the only culture where they'll just stir fry vegetables and give them to you with some rice. Otherwise, it's all just like you cannot get healthy meals.
I think you've seen that difference, right? That real care. And I think you rightly said, and you said that to me in the conversation earlier also. It's not about providing a helpline and the support. You need to walk that talk, right? That you really care. You're training people to be able to support each other better than so.
Well, I think the same things happen with diversity and inclusion, right? Which is, I think where diversity and inclusion is, so it's an important topic, and where it's done with real intent, purpose, and care, it works. But then that became another checklist for, corporate governance, where you had to show you did 5 things, and so people put in place 5 things, and there was a complete backlash because it's just not done correctly. So I think it's so much intent is just so important.
Boeing dismantling or idea initiative.
Oh, I didn't know. I've not read.
This week saying, hey, it's not making business sense. Probably it needs to be. It need not be another tick in the checkbox as a team doing something, right? It needs to be a strategy of the organization, probably linked to that business goals.
Yeah, to my mind, it makes absolutely no sense if such a large part of the population is not. So, for example, in the context of India, right, we're very good at talking about gender. We're not good at talking about caste. Most organizations will not have anyone from scheduled castes or scheduled tribes. They just won't. Not because they're biased against them, but they don't go find them. That must be the 10-15% of the population, right? Then you have women. I mean, I can cut all these minorities and say, actually, probably 60-70% of the population is underrepresented in our corporates. But if you believe that's your market that you're selling to, then don't you want them? Don't you want their thinking, their culture, their understanding to be reflected in your organization? Like, doesn't it just make sense to have somebody who understands their unique needs, their unique context, to help you reach them better, make a better product, service for them, just very selfishly and very commercially? It just makes sense. But not enough time has been spent discussing that. A lot of time has been spent discussing what percent of board members are women, what percent of top team is women. But that's for me, that's the tail wagging the dog.
Absolutely, I agree. Right. It's about defining it in a right way. Right. I think some of these things like wellness, like AI, have become more of a tick in the checkbox.
Which is what happens when you're rolling things out at scale.
Yes.
It's difficult to do it with quality. It is.
In fact, so we work with 100 plus organizations, right? A lot of places, that's the thing. Do this, do that, hum this week ka ye calendar bata which is all okay, right? But how do you say that you've done a good job, right? What is wellness for you in the organization? If people feel psychologically safe in the organization, they feel belonged in the organization, and there is this physical, social, financial, emotional, there are certain parameters. If there is an emotional well-being of that and it has improved over time, that's when your wellness level is increasing. It's not about we did this and 50 people participated, we did this, 20 people participated. See, is that making a cumulative impact, right? Because I believe that only when you define things, you could measure, that's when both can objectively see things are moving in the right direction, right? As a leader, you also need something to say, like you said, DEI, right? Is it about so many people in the room, or is it about, see, it can also make a business impact, right? Probably one of the last things that I want to also ask you, Suraj. You have two sons, 10th and 12th, I believe.
Yeah.
If you were to think about a world for them, right, where you would be at peace, okay, they are going in a world like this, what would that world be?
I'd like to reverse the question, because I don't think we can do much about the world around us. I'd like them to have the self-knowledge to pick their spot in the world, pick a spot that makes them happy. One. Two, I'd like them to be able to work hard to do very well for themselves in that spot that they pick. And by very well, I don't mean just financially. Obviously, I think, they'll want to do well financially, but to master something, to master a skill, to master an art, to become really good at something, because I think there's beauty in there and there's wisdom in that. But it's tough because the world is changing so quickly. And this is partly what we're doing at Inner Compass, is trying to solve this, which is that kids aren't taught about the world at school. They're taught about physics and chemistry and biology. And then they're taught about how to apply to colleges and how to ace the admissions process. Nobody for a minute tries to tell them or helps them understand what people actually do in the world. Right? When people come, all your employees come to your doors, what are they doing all day? When we ask kids, what do your parents do? The number one answer is they do meetings. Number two answer is they do Zoom calls. And we ask them, what do they do on these Zoom calls? PowerPoint presentations. Right? Because, when we don't do a good enough job, I think, at helping these kids understand what skills do they really have. Like, what are they really good at in a way? Like, what are they really good at in a way that's going to make a difference to their lives? Like, is this child particularly perceptive about people? Or is this child particularly good at negotiating? Or is this child particularly good at just designing stuff? Does this child really think out of the box on how to put like 10 materials together to make something work? Don't you wish that? And that's what I really wish that my kids find out early in life, so they can pick their spot. I always felt I got by fine in the corporate world, but at the core, I just love to create stuff, and that's something I realized much later in life, because I can't draw for the life of me. So I've never thought of myself as creative. And now in my 40s, I find myself cooking, and I never use a recipe book. I find myself doing photography. I love taking photographs. I find myself writing short stories again, which I last wrote in school. I suddenly find actually I enjoy being creative, and for me the process of it'll be so wonderful if my professional life is about creating stuff, which is what I suppose I'm discovering a bit late. So I hope they discover their spot in the world early.
And what sort of organizations would you want them to go towards? Okay.
I really don't care. I really don't care. I think that there's this very, very high chance that they live till 100. I think that a life that goes till 100, where you're healthy and fit to work till 90, which is also high chance. It's So if you start working at 20, you've got a 70-year work life. I think their lives and their careers are going to be very different. I think there's a high probability that they will go back to college when they're 50. They'll go back to college when they're 70 for 4 years and just reskill completely. So I think just self-knowledge is all that I really wish for them.
My mom is 70 and she just got back to college.
Wow.
She's like, I want to do masters in yoga. She's been practicing yoga for a long time, but she's like, no, I want to do it professionally. Instead of masters.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
And it's going to happen more and more.
Yes. And I think it's just like, she enjoys it so much. She's probably so much older than her teachers and everybody else in the class. But I think she's the most enthusiastic person in the class, saying, hey, wow, yeah,
wow. No, it's actually, if you take that framework and you think about what is the best first job to have, is your best first job something which gives you a lot of money so that the next 2 jobs you can do whatever you want? Is your best first job something which teaches you a skill that you're really, really good at, that you can then go and leverage in your second job to make a lot of money and get whatever you want in life? Like, when do you stop building a foundation? Is it at 40? Is it at 20? Is it at 30? I think we're going to re-question a lot of that in the coming 20 years. Learning itself, right?
The way technology and everything is changing every 5 years, there has to be so much of learning and relearning. And so I think doing what we like, enjoy, probably becomes even more important. Right? We have to sustain that 70 years of our career.
Yeah.
If we are not able to enjoy what we are doing,
exactly. Can you imagine being a banker for 70 years?
I haven't been for even a day, so I don't know what it looks like. I just know my friends not enjoying that, but still doing that.
It's just a very, I think that it's a very hard charged life. Again, no judgments at all, but it's those number of hours, for how many years can you work? And therefore, I wonder what a banker's second life is and third life, or a consultant's second life and third life, or a marketeer's second life or third life. Who knows?
I'm just seeing my parents, and my mother was in administrative services, so the 40 years of career was quite hectic with government budgets and this. And then she's like, you know what, I'll do yoga. Let me go teach people yoga.
And she could do it for 20 years more?
Yeah. She's really enjoying that, right? It's nice, very nice.
And this 20 years would have been, just 50 years ago, potentially someone's whole professional life. And this is now her third wind, if you will, right? That's the kind of opportunity people have to learn. But they also have to live with themselves for longer.
And that's why it's important to focus on their wellness, diet, right? Lifestyle, so that they can...
Can you imagine living 50 years as a diabetic or as a... Like, it must be... So I think that's important.
And you are at 47, figuring out what you want to do in life.
I still don't know what I'll be when I grow up.
Yeah, it's so
My
exciting.
wife will tell you she doesn't know when I'll grow up. But yeah, I still don't know. We'll see. We'll find out.
Thank you so much, Suraj. Lovely having a conversation with you. I learned so much.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for your time.